Hello, dear friends. Lotus Light Teachings, a place where we explore the timeless wisdom of Buddhism and how it can bring peace, clarity, and purpose into our daily lives. Life is a journey, and along the way we meet many people, some who uplift us and others who drain our energy. As we grow older, the importance of protecting our peace and choosing the right relationships becomes clearer than ever. So today, we'll dive deep into a topic that is both challenging and liberating: how to let go of toxic relationships and cultivate a life filled with love, peace, and true connection. By the end of this video, you'll have a new perspective on the relationships in your life, and most importantly, you'll understand that letting go is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-love. So make yourself comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin this journey together. Have you ever felt emotionally drained after spending time with certain people? As if their presence takes more than it gives, leaving you feeling exhausted instead of uplifted? Imagine carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones. Each stone represents a burden, a toxic relationship, a manipulative friend, or a family member who never truly appreciates you. At first, the weight seems manageable, but over time, it becomes overwhelming. You keep carrying it, out of habit or obligation, until one day you stop and ask yourself, why am I carrying this? Does this weight truly belong to me? In Buddhism, we learn that letting go is not an act of rejection. It's an act of wisdom. Just as a traveler must pack lightly for a long journey, we too must choose what and who we carry with us through life. As we grow older, our time and energy become even more valuable. This is why protecting our peace is not selfish. It's necessary. In today's video, we will explore how to recognize unhealthy relationships, set boundaries, and cultivate meaningful connections that bring you joy instead of stress. Because in the end, the people in your life should not be a source of suffering. They should be a source of strength. So take a deep breath, make yourself comfortable, and let's embark on this journey of self-reflection together. 1. The manipulator, they use guilt to control you. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from running a marathon or working late into the night. It's heavier than sore muscles, deeper than physical fatigue. It's the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your soul slowly over time, like water dripping onto stone, eroding you bit by bit until one day, you realize you have nothing left to give. And yet, you keep giving. You keep answering the phone, you keep saying yes, you keep bending, stretching, sacrificing, until you wake up one morning and wonder how much of yourself is still yours, and how much has been carved away by the needs of others. I used to think that being a good person meant never saying no. If someone needed help, I would be there. No hesitation. If a friend was struggling financially, I'd offer what I could, even if it meant putting my own needs aside. If a family member called late at night, voice trembling with yet another crisis, I'd push aside my own exhaustion and listen. Because isn't that what we're supposed to do? Aren't we supposed to be the ones who never turn our backs? The ones who stay, no matter how much it drains us? I thought so until I met Mrs. Thompson. She was in her late 60s when I met her. A woman with warm brown eyes and a quiet kind of sadness that clung to her like a shadow. We met at a small bookstore where she worked part-time, arranging books with a care that made me think she had once loved stories. We started talking over coffee one day, and somehow, she told me the story of her son. He was a good boy, she said, staring into her cup as if searching for something she had lost. Smart, charming, but he always needed help. Money, mostly. First, it was just little things. Textbooks, rent, car repairs. And of course, I helped. That's what mothers do, right? I nodded. But over time, the requests got bigger. A loan he never repaid. Bills that he promised to cover next month, but next month never came. And when I started saying no, do you know what he said? She looked up then, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, after everything I've done for you, you won't even help me? I felt that sentence in my bones, because I had heard it before too. Maybe not in those exact words, but in the same tone. The same quiet, insidious guilt that wraps itself around your heart and squeezes. Manipulators don't always come as villains. They don't storm in like thunderstorms. They slip in like mist, unnoticed until you're drowning in it. And the hardest part? Sometimes they are the people we love the most. Buddhism teaches us that true compassion begins with ourselves. At first, I struggled with this idea. Felt selfish. How could I put myself first when others needed me? But then I read something the Buddha once said. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. And that's when it hit me. Compassion does not mean sacrificing yourself to keep others afloat. It means recognizing when your help is enabling, when your kindness is being used as a leash rather than a gift. Mrs. Thompson learned this lesson too, but it took years. One day, she finally told her son no, not because she stopped loving him, but because she realized that love is not measured by how much suffering you endure for someone else. It was the hardest thing she ever did. For weeks, he was angry. He didn't call, and for the first time in years, she had silence. But in that silence, she found something she had long forgotten, herself. And then, something incredible happened. Her son figured things out. He got a job, paid his bills. He survived, without her constant sacrifices. That's the thing about manipulators. They thrive on your belief that they need you. But the moment you step back, they are forced to stand on their own. And many of them can. I think about Mrs. Thompson often, about how many people in this world are carrying the weight of invisible chains, not realizing they have the power to set themselves free. So let me ask you, who in your life makes you feel guilty for setting boundaries? Who takes from you over and over without giving anything in return? And most importantly, what would happen if you finally said no? Because here's the truth. You are not a lifeline. You are not a bottomless well. You are not obligated to exhaust yourself to keep others comfortable. And if someone loves you, truly loves you, they will never ask you to destroy yourself for their benefit. So, if you are carrying the weight of someone else's expectations, I want you to do something. Tonight, when you lay in bed, imagine setting that weight down. Imagine yourself standing tall, lighter, breathing easier. Imagine saying no, not with anger, not with guilt, but with the quiet certainty that your peace matters too. And when the guilt tries to creep in, when the voice in your head whispers that you are being selfish, remember this: the people who truly love you will never punish you for choosing yourself. It's not easy. I won't pretend it is, but peace, the kind of deep, soul-level peace that settles into your bones like sunlight, is worth fighting for, and it starts the moment you realize that you deserve it. 2. The self-absorbed person, they never listen to you. There is a quiet kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being unheard. You know the feeling. You sit across from someone, eager to share a thought, a memory, a moment that matters to you. You begin speaking, words forming with warmth, only to be interrupted mid-sentence by, "Oh, that reminds me of when I..." And suddenly, you're not in the conversation anymore. You're just a spectator watching someone else take center stage. It happens in friendships, in families, in workplaces. Sometimes it's subtle. Someone who always shifts the conversation back to themselves, who never pauses to ask how you are, who dominates every exchange as if the only perspective that matters is their own. Other times, it's blatant. People who treat your presence as nothing more than a sounding board for their own stories, opinions, and grievances. For years, I tolerated it. I told myself maybe they don't realize they're doing it. Maybe they just have a lot on their mind. But over time, I began to wonder, why do I keep pouring my energy into conversations where I don't exist? Then I met Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis was a retired professor who lived in a small-town bookstore, or at least that's how it felt. He wasn't the owner, but he spent so much time there, perched in a corner with a book, always ready for conversation, that he might as well have been. I met him on a quiet afternoon when I was browsing for something to read. He struck up a conversation, and before I knew it, we were talking about everything. Philosophy, history, the way the world had changed. But here's what struck me the most. He listened, really listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't hijack the conversation. He asked questions, nodded thoughtfully, let my words settle before responding. It was a simple thing, but it felt revolutionary. At some point, I asked him why he spent so much time in that bookstore, and his answer stayed with me. Because here I can find people who listen. Outside of these walls, I spent too many years being invisible in conversations. People love to talk, but few love to listen. His words hit me harder than I expected, because I realized, in that moment, that I had been surrounding myself with people who love to talk, but never to listen. There's a lesson in Buddhism that speaks to this. The Buddha once said, "When you talk, you are only repeating what you already know. But if you listen, you may learn something new." Deep listening is an act of compassion. It's a gift we give to others, not just hearing their words, but truly being present for them. When we listen with awareness, we create meaningful connections. But self-absorbed people don't offer that gift. They live in their own bubble, their own reality, where their thoughts, their experiences, and their voices are the only ones that matter. And that kind of relationship, it's exhausting, because conversations should be a dance, not a monologue. They should be an exchange, a mutual space where both people feel valued, seen, and understood. But when you're constantly in conversations where you feel invisible, something inside you starts to shrink. I know this because I lived it. For years, I surrounded myself with people who talked at me, not with me. Friends who never paused to ask how I was doing. Relatives who only called when they needed something, never to check in. Coworkers who rambled about their lives but never once asked about mine. And for a long time, I accepted it. I told myself this is just how people are. Maybe I'm expecting too much, but I was wrong, because everyone deserves to be heard. I think of Maya Angelou, one of the greatest voices of our time, who once said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." How many of us go through life carrying stories no one ever asks to hear? How many of us sit across from people, waiting for a pause, for an opening, for someone to say, "Tell me about you," only for that moment to never come? It's not just frustrating, it's damaging, because when we are unheard for too long, we start to believe that maybe our voice doesn't matter. But it does. And the moment I realized that, I made a decision. I would stop investing in conversations where I felt unseen. I would stop pouring my energy into people who never paused to listen. Instead, I would choose better conversations. The first time I tried to redirect a conversation, it felt strange. A friend had interrupted me for the third time in a row, steering the discussion back to her own problems. Normally, I would have let it slide. But this time, I gently said, "I'd really like to finish what I was saying." She blinked, surprised. For a moment, I worried I had been rude. But then, something interesting happened. She actually stopped and let me finish. It was a small shift, but it made all the difference. Because here's the truth. People treat you the way you allow them to. If you constantly let people interrupt, they'll keep doing it. If you always listen but never speak, they'll assume you don't have much to say. If you surround yourself with people who never listen, you will start to feel like your voice doesn't matter. But it does. So, let me ask you, who in your life truly listens to you? Who makes you feel invisible in conversations? And most importantly, what would change if you started choosing better conversations? Because here's what I learned. You don't have to stay where you are unheard. There are people out there, like Mr. Lewis, like those rare souls who truly listen, who will make space for your words. You just have to be willing to let go of the ones who don't. If this resonates with you, I want you to do something. The next time you're in a conversation, pay attention. Notice who listens and who doesn't. And if you find yourself shrinking in someone's presence, ask yourself, do I really want to keep investing in this space? Because your words, your thoughts, your stories, they matter, and you deserve to be heard. 3. The constant critic, they make you doubt yourself. There's a moment in everyone's life when they hear a voice that isn't their own, whispering doubt into their mind. Sometimes it's soft, so subtle that you mistake it for your own thoughts. Other times, it's loud and relentless, repeating the same message over and over. Are you sure you can do this? What if you fail? Maybe you should just quit while you're ahead. That voice doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the critics. The people who make it their mission to remind you of your limitations, who question your dreams under the disguise of concern, and who think they know what's best for you, even when they don't. The problem is, when you hear something enough times, you start to believe it. And before you know it, the voice of the critic becomes your own. I remember the first time I saw a little girl hesitate before doing something she was excited about. She was standing at the edge of a playground, watching the older kids climb a tall jungle gym. Her hands twitched at her sides, itching to join them. But then, her mother's voice cut through the air. "Be careful. You might fall." The girl took a step back. She hadn't fallen. She hadn't even tried. But the idea of failure had been planted in her mind before she even got the chance to succeed. That's how it starts. A word here, a comment there. Someone laughs when you express an idea. A relative raises an eyebrow when you say you want to try something new. A friend sighs and says, "I just don't want to see you disappointed." And just like that, doubt becomes part of you. Critics have a way of making themselves sound like they're helping you. They say things like, "Are you sure you want to do that at your age? That's not a smart decision, you know? I just think you should be realistic." But let's be clear. Realism is not the same as pessimism. A realist acknowledges obstacles but believes in possibilities. A critic sees only barriers and calls it wisdom. And the worst part? Most of these people aren't trying to hurt you. They don't even realize the damage they're doing. But words, once spoken, become part of the air we breathe. There's an old Buddhist teaching that compares words to arrows. If someone shoots an arrow at you, it will only hurt if it pierces your skin. But if you step aside, if you refuse to let it touch you, it falls harmlessly to the ground. Criticism is the same way. It only wounds you if you accept it as truth. The Buddha knew this centuries ago, but today we still let words get under our skin, defining what we believe about ourselves. It's easy to say, ignore the critics. But how do you do that when they're the people closest to you? Parent, a sibling, a spouse, someone whose opinion should matter? You choose what to let in. Not every comment deserves space in your mind. I once knew a woman named Margaret. She was in her 70s when she decided to take up painting. Not for money, not for recognition, just for the sheer joy of it. Her family didn't understand. "What's the point at your age?" they asked. "Aren't there better things you could be doing? Why waste your time?" But Margaret didn't listen. She bought her brushes, set up a small studio, and painted anyway. At first, it was just simple landscapes, then portraits. Then, something incredible happened. Her paintings started telling stories. They captured emotion, history, and pieces of her life that words couldn't express. And one day, without even trying, her art became her legacy. A gallery in her town discovered her work. People started buying her paintings. She was invited to showcase them in exhibitions. And the same family members who once dismissed her, they were the first to tell her how proud they were. But here's the thing. Margaret didn't need their approval. She had already proven to herself that she was capable, that her passion was worth pursuing. She had already won. So let me ask you something. What have you stopped yourself from doing because of someone else's doubt? Whose voice is living in your head, telling you that you can't? And what would happen if you decided to prove them wrong? Because here's what I've learned. Most critics are just afraid. Not for you, for themselves. They see you reaching for something bigger, something outside the limits they set for themselves, and it scares them. So they project their fears onto you. But you don't have to accept them. The next time someone questions your dreams, do what Margaret did. Smile, nod, and do it anyway. If they laugh, let them laugh. If they doubt, let them doubt. But never, ever let their words become the reason you don't try. Because in the end, the only voice that truly matters is your own. If this resonates with you, take a moment right now. Think of one thing, just one, that you've wanted to do but held back because of someone else's opinion. Now, promise yourself that you'll take the first step toward it. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now, because the best way to silence the critic is to succeed despite them. And trust me, that success will taste sweeter than any approval ever could. The weight we carry, letting go of the unworthy. There's a story I once heard about a monk and his student walking along a muddy path. They came across a woman struggling to cross a river. Without hesitation, the monk lifted her onto his back, carried her across, and set her down. They continued walking in silence until, hours later, the student couldn't hold it in any longer. "Master," he said, "why did you carry that woman? We are not supposed to touch women." The monk smiled and replied, "I set her down at the river's edge. Why are you still carrying her?" That story stayed with me for years because it speaks to something we all do. We carry burdens that aren't ours to bear. We hold onto relationships, obligations, and expectations that we should have set down long ago. And often, the heaviest weights we carry aren't our own. There was a time in my life when I thought helping people meant saving them. I had a friend. Let's call him David. He was brilliant, charismatic, and always full of ideas. But he was also reckless. He made bad financial decisions, ignored responsibilities, and somehow, every time he found himself in trouble, he called me. "I just need a little help this time," he'd say. "I promise, I'll fix it soon." And of course, I helped. Because that's what friends do, right? At first, it felt like I was doing something good. But over time, something shifted. The calls became more frequent. The problems got bigger. And every time I thought he'd finally learn, he'd make another mistake and come running back. Took me years to realize what was happening. David wasn't fixing anything because he never had to. Every time I saved him, I made it easier for him to keep making the same mistakes. I wasn't helping him. I was keeping him from helping himself. Buddhism teaches about karma, not as a mystical force, but as the idea that every action has consequences. When we constantly rescue someone, we prevent them from experiencing those consequences. We think we're being compassionate, but in reality, we are interfering with their ability to grow. It wasn't until I stopped helping David that he finally started to change. Not immediately. First, he was angry. He accused me of being selfish. He tried to guilt me into fixing things one more time. But I held my ground, and something incredible happened. He figured it out. He got a job. He paid off his debts. He learned because he had no other choice. And I finally set down the weight I was never meant to carry. But not every weight is so easy to drop. Some burdens don't come in the form of irresponsible people needing rescue. Sometimes they come disguised as love. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that comes from giving your all to someone who never truly sees you. It happens in friendships, in families, in marriages. You pour your time, your energy, your love into a person, only to realize one day that they have never truly valued it. Few things feel worse than being taken for granted. I once knew a woman named Eleanor. She had spent her whole life giving. She was the kind of person who never showed up empty-handed, who remembered birthdays, who would drop everything to be there if you needed her. But no one did the same for her. Her children rarely called unless they needed something. Her friends only reached out when it was convenient. Even her husband, after decades of marriage, had stopped noticing the little things she did for him. One day, Eleanor told me something that broke my heart. "I think if I stopped trying, no one would even notice." And she was right. For years, she had trained people to expect her kindness without ever requiring them to return it. She had built relationships where she gave and they took. And like so many others, she told herself that this was just how love worked. But love is not a one-way street. Buddhism teaches that true giving should be joyful, not exhausting. Giving should nourish, not deplete. If your kindness feels like a burden rather than a gift, if the people around you take but never give, it's time to redirect your energy. Eleanor didn't leave her family. She didn't abandon her friendships. But she did something just as powerful. She changed the way she gave. She stopped reaching out to people who never reached back. She stopped saying yes when she wanted to say no. She stopped waiting for people to appreciate her and started appreciating herself. And something strange happened. Some people disappeared, and that was okay, because the people who truly valued her, they noticed the shift. They started making an effort. They realized that love is not about what you can take. It's about what you choose to give. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor felt light. I think about Eleanor often. I think about all the people who are giving to the wrong places, who are carrying burdens that were never theirs to carry. So I want to ask you, who in your life do you keep saving when they should be saving themselves? Who do you keep giving to, even though they never truly appreciate it? And what would happen if you finally let go? Because here's the truth. Not everyone deserves your energy. Not everyone deserves a front row seat to your life. And the moment you realize that, the moment you start choosing where your love, your time, and your kindness go, you set yourself free. So tonight, when you lay in bed, take a deep breath. Think about the weights you're carrying, and ask yourself, which ones am I ready to set down? The ungrateful, they take you for granted. I once heard a story about a man who spent his whole life planting trees in a barren land. Every morning, before the sun rose, he would walk to the dry fields and sow seeds, watering them with whatever little water he could find. He did this not for recognition, not for wealth, but simply because he believed the land deserved to bloom. Years passed. The trees grew tall, their branches stretching toward the sky, offering shade to those who passed by. Strangers would sit under them, enjoying the cool air, never wondering who had planted them, never stopping to acknowledge the man who had nurtured them. One day, someone finally asked him, "Why do you keep planting trees when no one even thanks you?" He smiled and said, "I don't plant them for gratitude. I plant them because this world needs more trees." That story stayed with me, because while it carries a beautiful message about selfless giving, it also made me think about how often we give to people who don't even realize it. There is a kind of pain that comes not from being hurt, but from being overlooked. It happens when you pour your heart into someone, whether it's through love, kindness, time, or support, only to realize that they never truly see it. It's the feeling of cooking a meal for someone who eats it without a word. It's the silence after you've spent hours helping a friend through a difficult time. It's the emptiness of waiting for a thank you that never comes. It's not that we give expecting something in return, but when you give to someone over and over again, and they treat it as an expectation rather than a gift, it wears you down. I once had a friend. Let's call her Lisa. Lisa was the kind of person who needed constant support. She would call late at night needing advice. She would text during the day asking for help. And I gave it willingly, because that's what friends do. But one day something shifted. I was going through something difficult myself, and for the first time I was the one who needed support. I reached out to Lisa. She didn't reply. Hours passed, then days. Finally, when she did respond, her message was brief. "Sorry, I've been really busy. Hope you're okay." And in that moment, something inside me broke, because it made me realize she had never truly valued what I gave. She didn't see the late-night calls, the endless support, the times I put my own needs aside to help her. She had only seen what she could take. That's the thing about ungrateful people. They don't always mean to hurt you, but they do, because they never stop to appreciate the space you hold for them. Buddhism teaches that true generosity should be free of attachment. The Buddha once said, "Give, but do not let yourself be used. Love, but do not let your heart be abused." That means giving should come from a place of joy, not obligation. It should uplift you, not drain you. But if your kindness starts feeling like a burden, if the people around you start expecting your help rather than appreciating it, something needs to change. Because there is a difference between giving freely and being taken for granted. There's a reason why gratitude is one of the most powerful emotions. It transforms something ordinary into extraordinary. A simple thank you can turn a meal into an act of love. A small acknowledgement can make an effort feel seen. A moment of appreciation can remind someone that what they do matters. But when gratitude is missing, when you are surrounded by people who take and take without ever looking back, it creates an invisible wound. You start to wonder, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I even valued? And here's the truth. You are. But maybe, just maybe, you are giving to the wrong people. I think of Oprah Winfrey, who once said, "Be thankful for what you have. You'll end up having more. If you concentrate on what you don't have, you will never, ever have enough." Gratitude doesn't just change how we receive. It changes how we give. And the most powerful shift you can make in life is choosing to give where your kindness is valued, not just expected. Because there are people out there, friends, strangers, communities, who would be deeply grateful for what you bring to the world. You just have to find them. So, let me ask you, who in your life appreciates you, and who simply expects you to be there? Where are you giving your energy, and is it being valued? And most importantly, what would happen if you started giving to those who truly cherish it? Because kindness should never feel like an obligation. Love should never feel like a duty. And the people who truly deserve you, they will always say thank you, even if it's just in the way they hold space for you in return. Now that we've reflected on the relationships that shape our lives, let me leave you with this thought. Imagine standing at the shore holding a handful of sand. The tighter you grip it, the more it slips through your fingers. But if you hold it gently, only the right amount stays. This is how relationships should be. We don't need to hold on to everything. Some people are meant to stay with us forever, while others serve a purpose for a time and then drift away. The key is knowing which ones to cherish and which ones to release. The Buddha once said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." And so, I ask you, what relationships in your life bring you peace? Which ones feel like a burden? And what are you willing to let go of to create space for joy? Let's continue this conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this message resonated with you, give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings for more wisdom. Thank you for being here. May your days be filled with love, peace, and meaningful connections. Until next time, take care.